favorite, negative numbers. So you definitely want to be able to deal with negative numbers. We need to be able to add them, subtract them, multiply, and divide them. So we'll do some questions of each type to remind you how to do these things. The first thing we'll do is multiply and divide, because I think those are the most straightforward. For everything I'm talking about here in this video, there's all sorts of ways to learn and understand integers. I'm just going to give you one or two ways that I like, that I've found have been successful with students, but if you've got another way that works, fantastic. Okay, as long as it works, it's fine with me. You don't have to follow my methods. Okay, with multiplying and dividing, I would say for most people, they just remember dividing. Is that spelled right? Dividing, yes. I think for most people, they just remember something like this. Positive times a positive equals a positive. Positive times a negative equals a negative. Negative times a positive equals a negative. And a negative times a negative equals a positive. Okay, once you've got that, you know the division too. It's exactly the same. Probably don't need to write it, but what the heck. A positive divided by a positive is a positive. A positive divided by a negative equals a negative. A negative divided by a positive equals a negative. A negative divided by a negative equals a positive. And then some people make up little rules for these, like they'll say something like, if the signs are the same, positive, positive, or negative, negative, they're the same, right? Then it's positive. So they even make up stories about it's a positive thing to have two of the same. Like in a couple, if you have two people that are the same, it's a positive thing. Two people that are the same, even if they're negative, it's a positive thing. I don't know. I just kind of remember this. A lot of people remember two negatives make a positive, but remember this is only for multiplying and dividing. It's not always true for adding and subtracting. So whatever way you want to do it, there you go. So I don't know, we could do a couple quick examples here. I don't know, positive 7 times negative 2. Okay, if you want, don't even worry about the signs right now. Just look at the numbers. 7 times 2, okay, it's 14, and now I'm going to figure out the sign. A positive and a negative, positive and negative. There it is, positive and negative equals a negative, like that, right? Negative 25 divided by negative 5. Okay, ignore the signs. 25 divided by 5 is 5. Negative divided by negative, there it is. Negative divided by negative, it's a positive. Positive 5. You can put the plus if you want, you don't have to. All right, that's about it. I mean, you could also get more difficult things like negative 4 times negative 2 times negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. Okay, ignore the signs. Just look at the numbers. 4 times 2 times 1 times 1 times 1. 4 times 2 is 8, times 1 is 8, times 1 is 8, times 1. Okay, that equals 8. Now I got to figure out if it's positive or negative. All right, well remember, every two negatives you have, those two negatives make a positive. These two negatives make a positive. One negative left over, so it's negative. If you want, if you play around with this a little bit, you're going to see that if you have an even number of negative signs, then your answer is going to be positive. And if you have an odd number of negative signs, you're going to have a negative answer. And that can help you answer questions like negative 2, well, let's do negative 1. Negative 1 to the 41st power. Okay, so that means negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 at 41 times, right? Let's just worry about the number part of that. 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, 41 times. Well, 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 times 1 is 1. It's just 1. And now you need to figure out whether it's positive or negative. Well, if you think of it, if we were to write this out, I'd have negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1, 41 times. I'd have 41 negatives. That's an odd number, so it would be a negative answer. What if it was actually 412? Now I have 412 of these. It's an even number of negative signs. Oh, now my answer would be positive. Okay, I think that's enough for multiplying and dividing. Let's get into adding. Whoops, let's not go there yet. Okay. Adding. Now, with adding, there's different ways you can think of it. Some people like thinking of a number line. So if the question was something like positive 2 plus negative 8. Okay, this is kind of the starting number. This is where you're going to start. I'm going to start at positive 2, which is right here. And then I'm going to add negative 8. Now, if I was adding positive 8, I'd go in the positive direction. But because I'm adding negative 8, I'm actually going to take 8 steps in the negative direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, my answer is negative 6. Okay. I think it's great for getting the concept of negative numbers, adding. I'm not sure how useful it is for when you're working with bigger numbers and stuff. We can do one more. Negative 4 plus, I don't know, negative 3. This is your starting number, negative 4, plus another negative. You have to go in the negative direction. So you're going to go 1, 2, 3. Oh, my answer is negative 7. What if this was negative 4 plus positive 3? Well, this time you'd start at negative 4 again, but this time you'd be going, because it's positive 3, you'd be going this way. The answer is negative 1. Okay, so maybe that works for you. That's great. There's no problem with that. Go for it if you like that method. Another way you can think of this is I like thinking of it like negative 4 is 4 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4. Positive 3 is 3 positives. 1, 2, 3. Now, every time you can, like if you have 1 negative and 1 positive, what happens when you have 1 negative and 1 positive? They cancel each other out. So for every pair I can find, there's a pair, it's gone. There's a pair, it's gone. And here's a pair, it's gone. So what I'm left with is 1 negative. Negative 1's my answer. Okay, now of course you don't want to be drawing all those things all the time. That would take all day. So basically what I do is I ask myself 2 questions, and maybe I'll write the questions down. The first question I ask myself is, are there more positives or negatives? And the second question I ask myself is, how many more? Okay, so for example, if we were doing negative 7 plus positive 2. 7 negatives, 2 positives. Are there more positives or negatives? Well, 7's a bigger number. There's more negatives. So that means your answer is going to be negative. How many more are there? Like, how many more negatives are there than positives? If you have 7 negatives and 2 positives, how many more negatives are there? 5. There's 5 more. Okay, let's look at another one. Positive 9 plus negative 14. Nah, let's do negative 15. What do you have more of, positives or negatives? Well, again, you have more negatives because there's 15 of them compared to 9. How many more is there? How many more negatives are there than positives? Well, if you took 9 of them can be canceled out by this positive 9, how many are left? 6. How about negative 3 plus positive 7? More negatives or more positives? More positives this time because there's 7 of them. So our answer is going to be positive. How many more positives are there than negative? 4. So what you might notice here, I mean, you don't really have to memorize this, but what you might notice is that if the signs are different, one's negative and one's positive, one's negative, one's positive, look what you actually did with the number, the 7 and the 2. You actually subtracted them to get the 5. 15 and 9 subtracted is 6. 7 and 3 subtracted is 4. This is very, very confusing for people because it's an addition question, but in a sense you're actually subtracting the numbers. So if the signs are different, you're actually subtracting the numbers. But as I said, I don't know if you really have to memorize that, because if you ask yourself those two questions, I think just by using common sense, you'll figure out that you have to subtract, right? If I have a question like positive 20 plus negative 32, what I have more of is my first question. Is there more positives or negatives? There's more negatives. And then how many more are there? Okay, well, there's 20 positives here to cancel out 20 of the negatives. How many negatives are left? Well, that means I have to go 32 minus 20. I have 12. All right, what if the signs are the same? So, for example, what if I have negative 8 plus negative 7? Same two questions. What do I have more of, negatives or positives? Well, I obviously have more negatives because I don't have any positives, so I have more negatives. How many more negatives are there than positives? Well, there's 8 negatives here and another 7 negatives here, so total I have 15 negatives. What if they're both positive? Well, you know this. You've been doing this for years and years when you have two positives, but let's just do it just to see. Positive 11 plus positive 11, let's say. Would I have more of, positives or negatives? Obviously positives. There are no negatives. How many more positives are there than negatives? Well, I've got 11 positives plus another 11 positives. I actually have 22 positives. You see what's different? When the signs are the same, if the signs are the same, add the numbers. 8 and 7 is 15. 11 and 11 is 22. Like that. Okay? Notice here, a negative and a negative does not make a positive. That's only a multiplying and dividing rule. For some reason, everyone remembers that rule, and they apply it to everything, including adding. So they see, oh, one negative, another negative. It's a positive answer. No, that's not true. You have 8 negatives and 7 more negatives, so you have negative 15. You have 15 negatives total. Okay, I would say this bit up here is the part that gives people the most problems. It's an adding question, but you're kind of subtracting the numbers there. Okay, there's my two questions that I use to answer these. All right, finally we get to subtraction. So let's write this down, subtraction or subtracting. Now, I find that subtracting is kind of difficult. So my advice, don't do it. Don't do it. Now, I know you're saying, well, what do you mean? If it's a subtraction question, how can I just not do it? Well, what I like to do is change it, turn it into an adding question. What you're going to do is you're going to add the opposite. I think this is the best way to deal with subtracting questions. If I had negative 4, take away negative 7, subtracting question. I don't want to subtract. It's too hard. It's just, I don't like it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the opposite. Okay, what do you do to the first? So I'm going to show you how to add the opposite right now. What you do to the first number is nothing, which I put leave alone, keep the same, don't change. I'll put don't change. We don't want to subtract. We want to add. So I'm going to change this to add, change to adding. And then we're not going to add the same number. We're going to add the opposite number. What's the opposite of negative 7? Positive. So you're going to change this to the opposite. Okay, we now have an adding question. How do you solve adding questions? I hope you haven't forgotten already. The two steps, the two questions right there. Okay, so I ask myself, what do I have more of, positives or negatives? Positives or negatives? I have 4 negatives. I have 7 positives. I think there's more positives in that case, so plus. I'm going to have a positive amount. How many more positives are there than negative? Well, I have 4 negatives, 7 positives. Oh, that means there's 3 more positives. Finished. Okay, I like this method of changing it to adding. You don't have, I mean, as I said before, you don't have to follow my method. If you're like, what, Mr. Waj, I hate that method, don't do it. But sure hope you're getting the right answers every time. Negative 5, take away positive 8, equals. Oh, it's a subtracting question. I don't want to subtract, so I'm going to add the opposite. Don't change the first number. It stays the same. Change the subtraction to an adding. Change the second number to the opposite. What's the opposite of positive 8? negative 8. I know that's a bit ugly, but that's a negative now. Okay? Now we answer this question. So we have we have to ask ourselves the two questions because it's an adding question. What do you have more of, negatives or positives? Remember, this is a negative. Well, you definitely have more negatives because you have a negative and more negatives. So we have lots of negatives. How many negatives do you have? How many more negatives do you have? Well, I got 5 and another 8. That gives me a total of 13 negatives. Okay, I think that's about it. One more example. How about, I don't know, positive 3, take away positive 9. I don't know why I'm doing another example. If you understand the previous ones, you understand. Okay, it's a takeaway, a subtracting questions. We don't want to subtract, so we're going to add the opposite. Don't change the first number. Change this middle sign to plus. Opposite of the second one, so it's now a minus question. Now it's an adding question. Good, we can ask ourselves the two questions. What do you have more of, positives or negatives? Well, I have more negatives. How many more do you have? How many more is 9 and 3? 6. Finished. Word of warning, please remember you're only doing this opposite, adding the opposite thing when it's a subtraction question. If I had negative 4 plus negative 7, I'm happy. I know how to do addition questions. Don't start doing this. Okay, I'm going to do the opposite of adding and the opposite here. Now I've got a subtraction question. You don't want to change it to subtraction. So remember, if it's a adding question, don't do any changes. Just answer it. What do I have more of, positives or negatives? I have more negatives. How many more negatives are there than positives? Well, I have 4 here and 7 here. Total, I have 11. So negative 11 is my answer. Okay, feel free to come and talk to me if you have more problems with adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing integers. I hope that helps.